Hi everyone, it's Priyanka here from SecurityHQ. Today, this is our first quarterly podcast for a quarterly global insight report. We produce tons and tons of data as an MSSP in SecurityHQ. Last year, we produced 30,000 plus reports, and we thought, why not we merge this data with our threat intel data and see that how our customer can take a risk-based approach, and all our listeners can see that there's an interesting viewpoint if you merge the threat intel data with the real-time events on the perimeter security. Today, I have Mohsin and Aaron with myself. Why don't Aaron, Mohsin, you guys introduce yourself? Aaron?
Yeah, thank you, Priyanka. Thanks for having me on the webinar today, right, and the recording. So I'm the regional director for Middle East and Africa, but also in, conjunction with that, I also head up the advisory team, which is obviously responsible for producing, threat intelligence service that we have, but also feeding that threat intelligence globally across customers, but also across our 6 security operation centers as well, making sure they've got threat-led, threat-informed defense. So that's me. So Mohsin, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for having me, Priyanka. I'm the Senior Manager for the Security Data Analytics team here at SecurityHQ. Primarily, my job here is to churn out the reports on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. So as you said, we annually generate multiple reports with billions of data that we have here at SecurityHQ. And this is another initiative that we have started to utilize that data, integrate it with multiple sources, tools that we have, and bring out some interesting data for the cybersecurity audience.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mohsin. Thank you, Aaron. So let's talk about what we are focusing on this quarter. So mainly we are focusing on our big data stack to look at our perimeter security. So we thought, why don't we leverage the phishing we see across not only what's being prevented or security controls work, not work, but rather than analyze the pattern around it. And then why don't we just connect it with the exploit attempts we see? So we are focusing mainly on phishing exploits. And quite interestingly, we see a very huge connective between the vulnerabilities with the exploits we see on the perimeter network. And I'd like to talk you through and wind up through the dark web intel the attackers use, and then see a little bit about this quarter incident and the industry sectors. So let's start with the phishing. As we know, none of us can work without emails, because emails is our everyday. Either we talk about the industry or we talk about anyone, either like a small shopkeeper to anywhere. Email is an immediate point. And every time we see attacks are towards phishing emails. It starts with, we start to do thought that where do we go with this email? And we looked at top level domains. We try to analyze the TLDs, and quite interestingly, we have a pre-release copy of this report, which is coming in next few days, which says .com is 83% of the, which is quite, we all know .com will be used as an anonymized domain. But next goes to .net. So the question to Mohsin yourself said that the report says .net contributes toward 8.3% of phishing emails, which is like, you can say, if .net is not your business purpose, you should just block it. Because .net being 8.3%, it doesn't sound right to that, like people are using .net as a main phishing attempts. So can you give us more in depth that how you gather this data from?
Okay, so before I jump onto the phishing data, I just want the audience to understand the methodology of the reporting, like how we have collected this data, right? So this is based upon mainly on 2 parts. One is the incidents that were raised in our SHQ response, as well as the traffic that we had observed over the multiple sources of information that we have, right? So using the advanced analytical techniques like AI and machine learning, we were able to employ data, identify certain patterns, and extract the most critical of the threat information. Because we have so much of information, we had to identify the most critical and high severity information only, right? So coming back to the phishing data, so the way we have analyzed this, or the method that we have used for data collection process, was to identify the top domain TLDs, right? Top level domains, correct? So we identified that there were whenever we talk about emails, right? So everyone has business emails, they have their personal emails. Most of them are common, right? So we don't want to talk about that. We wanted to go beyond that and identify the ones which might be utilized by the actors. So basically, we wanted to scrutinize the TLDs based upon like the frequency of the malicious activities towards such TLDs, right? So that is why what we did was we have filtered the data, and based on that, what we identify in the report as well is that most of it is .com, but we can observe it towards multiple other domains as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Mohsin, for that insight. Mohsin, being from the security background and now leading our data analytics team, that gives us a great insight how you have used different models against it. Aaron, I'd like your expertise around, if you look at phishing, and now which we said, okay, we got a gateways, either it's like advanced gateways like Abnormal or traditional gateways like Proofpoint. What happens after? We're dependent on proxy, we're dependent on endpoint. What's your advice around that?
Yeah, of course, because look, we can have the most advanced deployments, some sort of email gateway or no email gateway at all, or kind of varying deployments in between. Even your advanced gateways, right? There are cases where it has to learn, right, that maybe it's coming from a malicious sender or a spam account. It has to learn that. Sometimes it's not always a given, right? There aren't always signatures to tell us that. So in essence, at that point, we are relying on, we go back to the old, kind of understanding of defense in depth, where we can't rely on one technology anymore, right? Things will get bypassed. It happens all the time. So let's say an email was to get through, there is either no, email gateway there, or there maybe is an email gateway with, good policies, but it's been able to slip through for whatever reason. You are now relying on, let's say, for example, a user clicking a link, right?
Yeah.
Typically, from a phishing perspective, we're looking to, I don't know, maybe redirect traffic to capture credentials, maybe an Office 365 login, some of them those lines, right? Maybe VPN login, fake website. At that point, we're looking for proxy traffic to tell us various different attributes and fields, but one of the most important ones for us from a prevention perspective is all about how that domain that's being clicked within the URL itself, within the actual email itself, how is that being categorized from a proxy perspective? It's no secret that a high proportion of these kind of phishing emails that come in are using links embedded that are typically uncategorized. So when we click on that as a unsuspecting user, they're typically uncategorized, and just by blocking uncategorized traffic in your business would be a huge reduction from an attack surface perspective, because typically the websites that you should be visiting from a business standpoint should either be categorized, and if they're not, it's quite a simple request. You can raise a request to your proxy vendor, for example, or there are numerous ones, and they can do a quick analysis of the website and get the website categorized for you, so it's no longer blocked. That's one way of doing it from a proxy perspective. Obviously, if it's a file attachment or a zip or an Exe or a PDF that maybe the email has been able to come through, then now we're relying on an EDR or an endpoint perspective. Maybe we're looking at, there are multiple different ways to detect, but obviously we're talking about policies on an endpoint. So we're talking about files, being saved directly from an email. Typically they get saved into downloads. Maybe upon execution of a files are typically dumped into a temp directory. We've got a whole bunch of detections around that. And so there's policies we can build around that as well to help us should a phishing email get through. Obviously then you've got your policies on an endpoint as well that can help us kind of really hone in from a malicious attack perspective. But that's all about the actual management of the policy itself. It can go quite finite, as you know, right? It can go quite granular from an extension perspective, from a directory perspective. It's a real combination, Priyanka, to be honest. But there's so many ways you can look at that.
It's quite interesting, Aaron, you mentioned there about the uncategorized website, because we see in our customer base, or it's like globally, it's a common problem, though things like my public SFTP domains, they're always gone as uncategorized. People just so much hesitant behind availability and security. They think that, okay, guys, you're giving me an advice to block uncategorized website. What about my IP based? So as Aaron suggested, please do reach out to your vendors and then get those categorized. It's not that if a known vendor has not categorized us just because they don't know it. And I have seen with our customer base, it's hardly they take around 5 working days to get it categorized and published. So that's a very good way to defense in-depth security. Coming to the endpoints again, That's a good point you mentioned about the file directories. Again, came to the same points. We try to do the policies with our services that, okay, let's not use a PowerShell, but everyone uses it. And you have an embedded link on your email and people just end up clicking it. And because they don't know, and not everyone in your company will be in IT. You'll have sales, you'll have marketing, you'll have HR. They don't know that there is an embedded link out there. So where there is a usability, there you should use these tools. And they really, really helps in the company posture. To just wrap up with this advice from Aaron and Mohsin, that is about just please do evolve beyond this. You can still use MFA because further in our report, we'll talk about, though we do lots of things about phishing, we still have the top talker as credential compromised in the dark web. So having said that, let's go to exploits. Now, very interestingly, we identified the IPS events, the signature. Signature is like, I feel it's a real gold mine. And when we try to look into it, that let's see that the exploits, above we see that remote code execution, infrastructure exploits from a high level categories. But then we wanted to learn more, apply some machine learning models and see. And Mohsin and his team did a great job by normalizing the data and identifying the CVEs. So that CVEs, Mohsin, I'd like to know, how did you categorize those CVs and map it? Because that's a really interesting data in the report.
Right. So while building this report, one of the approach was that we have millions of data which is related to exploit or potential exploit, right? But we wanted to, as I said, we wanted to carve out only the ones which is the most critical or most highly vulnerable data or events, right? So one of the things that we did was first we mapped the CVEs with the exploit data, okay, and that CVEs we cross-referenced it with the national vulnerability database that is available online. And based on that, we were able to then align it with the industries and the geographic regions. So based on that, we were able to derive data where we were able to showcase the data in terms of the top 5 industry-wise exploits, because it's really important to to show the data. Whoever is the end audience, they should be able to see if what kind of exploits are affecting their organizations or their industry. So that was the main intention behind doing that. To do this, also we have utilized machine learning algorithms. And that is based upon the risk score that each vulnerability had. So based on that, also we were able to showcase the top 5 exploits that we had seen. So we had seen like cross-site scripting, remote code execution. These are mainly the top talkers for the quarter, like from Jan to March onwards. And the industry-wise, we observed it that banking and financial services and government organizations were the most targeted or industries amongst all the industries that we had observed.
That's really great, Mohsin. While looking at this copy of the report, I see, Aaron, it's a very interesting point for yourself. While we're analyzing the CVE and utilizing your expertise around threat and risk center, we see that we had a lot of CVs got identified from an IPS, and quite interestingly, ConnectWise on the top, along with Forta and Ivanti remote code execution vulnerabilities. And ConnectWise, if you see, that was released on 7th of February, and we see in the same day. But I have a discussion topic for you. What do you feel about the exploits being released as a CVE, or how many days average it takes? Because I was reading an article around Palo Alto Unit 42, and as per them, it takes around like 40 days on average once a vendor releases an exploits and they assign a CVE until they publish it. So what's your advice around that to the viewers, that how should they react to these vulnerabilities?
I think 40 days average is probably a little bit too high for my liking, to be completely honest, because that's obviously averaging the entirety of any published CV, and obviously matching the weaponization against it. In our experience, I mean, as we've seen with ConnectWise and even Avanti and everything else, the time taken from the first kind of exploit in the wild, or be a proof of concept being published online. Sometimes proof of concepts being published are coming hours, maybe like 24 hours, 48 hours after the CV itself has been announced. And sometimes as well, what we've seen, especially with especially ConnectWise was a great example of that. The actual proof of concept, I believe, was published before the CV itself was even assigned. So it just shows you actually that, from my perspective, 40 days is probably a bit too uncomfortable for me to have that confidence from an average perspective. So for me, I would probably hesitate something like ConnectWise, which is going to give you remote access right into an environment. Something like Avanti, which is going to give you again initial access into an environment. Those types of vulnerabilities that enable you either kind of like remote code execution or privilege escalation that are remotely exploitable, they are going to be the top of the list for especially like nation state adversaries, right? So if you talk about like ConnectWise, which I think was probably the highest one, I think we mentioned in the report as a CVE perspective, ConnectWise was so popular with a known Chinese threat actor, which was UNC 5325. And because the Chinese are very good at going after these types of vulnerabilities, right? Because they are the first from an espionage perspective. Yeah, exactly. Because that's where they focus a lot of their efforts. Now, what becomes even more interesting is that we started to see a lot more ransomware activity as well post these vulnerabilities, like ConnectWise, like Adanti, because it come into the whole ransomware as a service ecosystem where you've got your initial access brokers, then you've got your ransomware affiliates and your ransomware operators, like a Lockbit or, Alphabet or Blackbuster. They would buy the exploit kit from initial access broker, use that as an initial access mechanism to then go and deploy their ransomware. And obviously the affiliates would do that rather than those operators because they are ransomware as a service model. So incredibly interesting, and the time to from publishing to weaponization, we're talking hours from a POC being published online to weaponization for sure.
Exactly.
For sure.
We'll add this Palo Alto. Sorry, Mohsin, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to add this. Interestingly, if you see the data, the countries, the source geographic countries, aren't really the ones which we usually would expect, the red alert countries. That's not the top talkers. I mean, these are like European countries. I can see the countries which you expect the traffic to be, expected. But these are the top talkers from where we are observing these exploits. So that's an interesting data that we observed in last quarter. So that's something that
I think Netherlands is the country, right?
I think France, Netherlands, UK, United States. So that's an interesting one that, it's not the same anymore where, you would expect the source IPs to be malicious always. The exploits can come from the IPs that are not, are either undefined or they were not, detected as malicious. So that's one of the interesting data that we observed while working on this report.
Yeah, that's really good insight, Mohsin. Aaron, going back to your point, so now you agree that ultimately the 0-day and the CV, we should not just wait around the CVs to be published. If there is a POC from the products you're using, please go ahead and look at your 0-day attacks and patch. The faster you patch, the faster you put a mitigation control around it, the better it is.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, the CVs, now, we spoke about the CVs and those CVs starting with ConnectWise or FortiGo Anywhere, and that gives an interesting fact about 2023 Verizon report. So email is no longer the top talker. Earlier, we used to talk about, hey, email is the most targeted vector. As per Verizon report as well, they say that web application is one of the major vector in 2023, which leads to the ransomware breaches. So the breaches also goes to this. So if you're using any public-facing applications and there is a vulnerability against it, it's increasing. The landscape is changing. It's going from phishing as an initial access to going to web application attacks as an initial access vector, which is quite interesting to see. And our quarterly report says exactly the same. Now, going back to just closing the loop around this initial actor, Aaron, as he mentioned earlier, he heads our threat advisory team. And quite interestingly, linking back with the phishing and the compromised credentials, the Global Insight report says that compromised credential is the top talker this quarter, where we see from the intel, and followed by the domains, the typo-squatting domains, the TLD type of domains. What's your say around that, Aaron? It's quite linked together.
Yeah, they are, and this is I think 2023 and obviously in early 2024 we had a couple of very large public data breach disclosures from various different sources that I won't name, but a lot of that talks to credentials unfortunately being exposed online. It's everybody knows it's very difficult to stop employees using third-party websites or third-party applications with, corporate credentials. Unfortunately, it's still a practice that's very difficult to stop. But then also going alongside that, it's no surprise to see that obviously once I've got credentials potentially for a corporate domain account, to then see kind of like domain impersonation side by side with that. Because if I potentially had credentials for 10, 15 domain users of one organization, I'm going to, cast my net, pretty close really, because I can just create a few impersonation domains or even subdomains in that aspect.
It's very
and
cheap.
maybe try and
You
track
just
some of
pay
these
£1.
users. Yeah, it's very cheap, and to be honest, they're making it very easy these days as well to have these domains, categorized. And look, let's be honest here as well. We have to recognize that the adversaries themselves are getting very good at the whole domain impersonation. They're waiting for the domain to gather trust. They're waiting for it to become registered and categorized as well. Because as you know, we've talked back, to go back a moment ago, we spoke about gateways and proxies. It's very easy now for a proxy to say, hey, do you know what? This domain, we're not going to allow you to visit it because it's been registered in, too recently, maybe like in the last 48 hours or something along those lines. So, they're getting good, and it's no real surprise for anyone to see exposed credentials and impersonating domains side by side. It's really not. It's kind of linked hand in hand.
So quite interestingly, Aaron, as you said there about your domain impersonation, and if you look at the data, so one of the advice or the recommendation, I would say that if you are enterprise level customers and you know that mostly the threat actors who are targeted, they look through these vectors. So why not you look before from an attacker's eye point of view? You can see your social media profile. They will try to impersonate even Facebook, LinkedIn, and all of these profiles. And it's really helped when you see that, okay, you have a domain. Why don't you own all the impersonated type of domains you do have? And you can maybe keep it as parked rather than none of the attacker use it, blocking your TLVs, identifying this. So where this helps the enterprise customer, Aaron, in terms of saving themselves before they get targeted and taking a risk-based approach to their security posture?
Yeah, well, I think you've literally just hit the nail on the head. We've literally just a second ago discussed how we've got controls around detecting newly registered domains, right? So we won't allow our users to go there or something along those lines. We now know that they will park domains and they'll wait and wait and wait, and they'll wait for the right time. They'll wait, and we've seen evidence of this in previous incident response engagements with the right CVE being published and the right access vector, be it a publicly exposed maybe access gateway or something along those lines, or maybe an open SSH vulnerability that now enables me to use remote services to get into the network. They will wait for the right CVE to come along, the right vulnerability to come along, and they will pair that then with, okay, great, I registered a domain for this company 9 months ago, and it's been sat there parked, it has a reputation, it's been trusted, it's no longer newly registered. They will use it, they will combine it as a kit. So by having, what we do proactively, as you know, Priyanka, is as soon as that domain is registered, if it's going to be used nefariously or not, it doesn't matter. As soon as we see it detected, as soon as we see maybe who is record, as soon as it has a DNS entry, we don't really, we don't care, because if we have a responsibility to raise that to the customer, that could be used in 6 months, 9 months time down the line, maybe even quicker than that, but we can raise the flag straight away and say, hey, we've detected this, impersonation domain or impersonating subdomain of yours. We believe it's not linked to you. We don't believe you registered it. We can see that who's data is different. For example, we can take action proactively, right? Rather than allowing the adversary to maybe use it and combine it with, as part of their exploit kit later on down the line. So taking proactive actions to detect and respond in the result of like a takedown request, helping customers take down these domains, kind of like whack-a-mole. One pops up, you put that one back down, another one comes back up. That's how that service operates. That's exactly what we're doing for the customers.
if you look at the inside this quarter itself, I think your team has taken down around dozens of domains, which is quite interesting. That they're taking a proactive approach to this, and that's where I'm just gonna wrap it up with our incident. How does the security incidents looks like for SecurityHQ? So if you look like, as we said, the most of the incidents we see, targeted or untargeted, as SecurityHQ, we deal with small, mid-size, enterprise level. It's a global footprint. And if you look at the type and industry sector, banking and finance industry seems to be like most of the incidents comes to that sector. And it's quite interesting, whereas it's like Verizon data report also leads to the same, that banking and finance industry is mostly targeted. And if you look at the vectors, where does this, one of the things we do interestingly, and this report shows that linking those to NIST threat event mapping. And we see unauthorized access is one of the top talker from an event mapping perspective, and which is quite, again, linked back to all the stuff we discussed. So quite interestingly, unauthorized access leading to, as a MITRE technique perspective, initial access. So if you see this whole report, what it gives us, it's link the threat intelligence team, the huge amount of MSSP data set, and gives you a risk-based approach that how should you deal with your zero-day vulnerabilities. You should not just put your exploits attempts in the detection mode. Even while pulling out these reports, myself and Mohsin, we recognize that a lot of customers still have this. Lot of things are there still in the detect mode, where people hesitate to turn into prevention mode. Where, Aaron, you mentioned about uncategorized sites in the proxy, people still hesitate. So it's like it's a continuous journey for us, and that's what the report says. And I think on the upcoming reports, we want to focus on the patterns, that how did it differentiate between the patterns. So any advice as a closeout notes, Aaron, Mohsin, because this was really quite interesting to know your point of views around that, and so that at least we know where to go, how to use these reports, because they are quite to take in, and just to make sure that from a perimeter perspective, we don't only use firewall proxies or endpoints or phishing gateways, use a dark web intel as well, because they all link tied together.
Yeah, they do. I'll go first, Priyanka. I think the years gone by, like you've mentioned, phishing was always number one. The user always got the blame. Typically, right? It was always the weak link. Yeah. We always will be the weak link, to be honest. It only takes one bad day, one individual. However, we also know that the reliance on various different technologies, either on the perimeter, even in clouds. There's a huge reliance on that, and adversaries. And we're not talking about script kiddies copying YouTube videos and things like that. We're not talking about those type of things. We're talking about real, nation state sponsored, be it Iran, be it China, be it Russia, be it Korea. It doesn't matter. We're talking proper, adversarial threat groups here that are now realizing that what the user is a good way to go, but we can't just rely on that. So they've got so many different ways of approaching, unauthorized access or initial access or reconnaissance. So we have to tie it all together, and what we are trying to do, from a threat intelligence perspective, is be, like I said at the start, being threat informed defense. If we know that a particular adversary is behaving in a certain way in a particular region, because a particular region has, a lesser posture than other parts of the world, then we could target that from a threat informed defense perspective and say, well, let's try and start detecting these types of techniques or tactics against these customers, because we know that adversaries in the past have gone after that part of the region in that manner. So it's hugely linked. And I just think education awareness really is number one. It's all we can keep doing, keep plugging. But I'll echo your point, Frank, around prevention. Let's not be worried about prevention. I understand there'll be some nuances to that, legacy, systems that can't have any control put on them. We understand that. But things at a gateway level, at an IPS level, at a proxy level, let's not be worried about prevention. Let's turn it on. It might be noisy to start with, but if it's on the perimeter coming in, then the impact is likely to be, relatively low, if we're preventing internal traffic, I would say. Exactly. That's probably what I would wrap up and say. We've got a fantastic data set, and we're only touching the surface on it in this kind of recording, I know. But yeah, Mohsin, I'll let you finish off. It's all your hard work with Priyanka that's gone into the data collection. So
Yeah, team's hard work, I can say. So the whole idea behind this was, this was my conversation with Priyanka like a couple of months ago, where we said that we're sitting on so much of data, but we don't really do much about it. Like we do give, make custom reports for our customers with SHQ, but we have so much of data that we can utilize and showcase, the trends and the patterns, the historical trends and the patterns that are available, that we can be utilized to compare. And we have tried to keep it this report more like from the industry sector wise, so that everyone should be able to consume this data. Whoever is going to read this report is going to find some interesting facts about it. Like I can't stop myself from talking about a couple of things which probably we didn't talk about. Is we are observing the top 10 incidents that were raised for the quarter was for food production and beverages. I mean, that's interesting, right? Like we usually expect that, the attacks towards the financial sector or towards the IT sector, but there's or healthcare, right? But food production and food beverage is something which we are observing, which is something which was observed this quarter. We haven't seen them as being at the top talkers previously. So that's the changing trend that the audience would be able to see every quarter. Okay, this is the first report. As you said, we are just touching the surface, and hopefully we'll bring out some more interesting data going forward.
That's really good. Thank you so much, Mohsin Aaron. Just to add into the Mohsin's points, we are moving towards Gen AI. We are using machine learning models. We are doing the predictive analysis on the data because we got the access to this big data and we'd like to build some models around it and integrate Gen AI to it. So on the upcoming releases, we'd like to make sure that you see those in the upcoming reports. So that's really it. Thank you, everyone.